What happens when the chosen one of the Force meets the brutal political landscape of Westeros? Today, we're exploring one of the most fascinating crossover scenarios imaginable. What if 9-year-old Anakin Skywalker, fresh from his pod race victory on Tatooine, somehow found himself crash landing in the Seven Kingdoms during the height of Robert's rebellion? Picture this. Qui-Gon Jinn's ship suffers a catastrophic hyperdrive malfunction while fleeing Naboo. The Trade Federation's blockade forces them into an emergency jump, but something goes terribly wrong. Instead of arriving at Coruscant, they're pulled through what can only be described as a dimensional rift, torn from their galaxy entirely, and hurled into another universe altogether. The ship crashes with devastating force in the war-torn riverlands of Westeros, roughly 2 years before what would have been the sack of King's Landing. The impact is so severe that the ship is completely destroyed, its advanced technology scattered and fused beyond recognition. Qui-Gon Jinn, the wise Jedi Master who might have guided Anakin away from darkness, is killed instantly in the crash. Young Anakin Skywalker survives with nothing but the clothes on his back, his incredible Force-enhanced reflexes, and a lightsaber he doesn't yet know how to properly use. The crash site becomes a crater of twisted metal and strange materials that the people of Westeros have never seen before. The first to discover it are small folk from a nearby village called Millbrook, a settlement so minor it doesn't appear on most maps. They approach cautiously, having heard the thunderous crash that shook the earth for miles around. What they find defies explanation. A boy, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, speaking in a language none of them recognize, clutching what appears to be a simple metal cylinder. His clothes are strange, made from fabrics they've never seen, and his skin bears the tan of a harsh sun, but different from any they know. The villagers take pity on the child, assuming him to be a survivor of some terrible accident involving one of the new siege engines being used in the rebellion. They bring him back to their village, where the local Septon tries to communicate with him through gestures and simple words. Anakin, traumatized by the crash and Qui-Gon's death, remains largely silent, his young mind struggling to process not just the loss of his master, but the complete absence of the Force signatures he had grown accustomed to feeling from other beings. The Force is still strong within him, but it feels different here, touched by something darker, more primal. For 3 days, Anakin remains in the village, slowly beginning to pick up basic words of the common tongue through his Force-enhanced learning abilities. The villagers treat him kindly, sharing their meager food and providing him with rough-spun clothes to replace his strange garments. But on the 4th night, everything changes. A group of bandits, deserters from various armies, who have turned to raiding to survive, descends upon Millbrook. They've heard rumors of strange salvage from the crash site and hope to find something valuable to sell. What follows is Anakin's first true test in this new world. As the bandits begin threatening the villagers who showed him kindness, something awakens within the boy. He's felt helpless before, watching his mother suffer in slavery, unable to protect her from Watto's cruelties. But here, now, he has power. The lightsaber ignites for the first time since the crash, its blue blade cutting through the darkness like a fallen star. The bandits freeze in terror as this slip of a boy holds a weapon that seems to be made of pure light. The confrontation is brief but decisive. Anakin's precognitive abilities, enhanced by the raw emotional energy of this violent world, allow him to anticipate every attack. His lightsaber cuts through the bandits' weapons like they're made of parchment, and when one of them tries to grab a village child as a hostage, Anakin uses the Force to hurl the man into a wall with bone-crushing intensity. The surviving bandits flee in terror, spreading tales throughout the riverlands of a demon child with a sword made of starlight who can kill with a gesture. But the victory comes at a cost. The villagers, who had begun to see Anakin as just another war orphan in need of care. Now look at him with a mixture of awe and fear. The local septon declares it a miracle, but others whisper of dark magic and unnatural powers. Within hours, Anakin realizes that his life of anonymity is over. Word will spread, and in a world torn apart by war, anyone with power becomes a target. Indeed, word travels with supernatural speed across the war-torn landscape. Ravens carry messages between castles, soldiers spread rumors around campfires, and merchants gossip in taverns. Within a week, multiple factions have heard tales of the boy with impossible abilities. The stories grow with each telling. Some say he can cut through castle walls with his magic sword. Others claim he can kill a man just by looking at him. Still others whisper that he can fly through the air or command the dead to rise. In Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister receives a detailed report from one of his spies. The old lion's calculating mind immediately grasps the implications. A weapon that can cut through any armor, wielded by a child who seemingly can predict his enemies' moves before they make them. Such a tool could end Robert's rebellion in a matter of weeks. More importantly, it could secure Lannister dominance for generations to come. He immediately dispatches a company of his most trusted knights, led by Sir Kevan Lannister himself, with orders to bring the boy to Casterly Rock, by whatever means necessary. Meanwhile, in the north, Ned Stark receives word through his own network of loyal men. His honor-bound nature sees only a child in need of protection, another victim of the chaos that has consumed the Seven Kingdoms. He thinks of his own children, safe in Winterfell, and cannot bear the thought of a boy so young being used as a weapon in grown men's wars. He sends his most trusted captain, Jory Castle's father Martin, south with orders to find the child and bring him north to safety. But neither force accounts for the third faction now taking an interest in young Anakin. Skywalker, the faith militant, though not yet the power they would become under the High Sparrow, still maintains significant influence throughout the Seven Kingdoms. When reports reach the most devout in King's Landing of a child wielding powers that seem to transcend natural law, the High Septon himself takes notice. Emergency sessions are held in the Great Sept of Baelor as learned Septons debate whether this represents a gift from the Seven or an abomination that must be cleansed from the world. The theological implications are staggering. If the boy's powers are truly divine in nature, he could be the warrior reborn, come to bring justice to the realm. But if they stem from darker sources, he represents a threat to the very foundations of the faith. After days of debate, prayer, and consultation of ancient texts, the High Septon issues a decree. The child must be brought before the faith for examination and judgment. If he proves to be blessed, he will serve the Seven. If he is cursed, he will burn. Anakin, meanwhile, has not remained idle in Millbrook. The Force whispers to him of approaching danger, of multiple groups converging on his location with less than benevolent intentions. His time as a slave on Tatooine taught him that when powerful people take an interest in you, it rarely ends well for the person they're interested in. He begins making preparations to leave, but the villagers, despite their fear, beg him to stay. The bandits were just the beginning. Deserters and brigands roam the countryside in increasing numbers, and without his protection, Millbrook will be defenseless. This presents Anakin with his first major moral choice in this new world. On Tatooine, survival meant looking out for yourself first and foremost. But these people showed him kindness when he had nothing, fed him when he was hungry, and sheltered him when he was lost. The Jedi code that Qui-Gon began teaching him speaks of protecting the innocent and serving others before yourself. Yet staying means facing whatever forces are converging on him. And he's just one boy with a lightsaber he barely knows how to use properly. The decision is made for him when Tywin's forces arrive first. Sir Kevan Lannister approaches Millbrook at the head of 50 mounted knights, their armor gleaming even in the overcast sky of the Riverlands. They come not as conquerors, but as recruiters, bearing gifts of gold and promises of protection. Sir Keevan, a reasonable man by Lannister standards, genuinely hopes to convince the boy to come peacefully. He's brought Meisters to examine the child's abilities, find clothes to replace his peasant garb, and even toys and sweets, thinking that despite his power, Anakin is still fundamentally a child who can be won over with kindness. The initial meeting takes place in Millbrook's small sept, with the village septon serving as an intermediary. Sir Keevan speaks of the great honor of serving House Lannister, of the education and opportunities that would be available at Casterly Rock, of the chance to use his gifts in service of peace and order. He's careful not to make overt threats, but the implication is clear. 50 knights didn't ride all this way to take no for an answer. Anakin listens politely, his young face betraying nothing of his thoughts. But through the Force, he can sense the true intentions behind Sir Keevan's words. He feels the man's genuine desire to resolve this peacefully, but also his absolute determination to complete his mission. More troubling, he senses the thoughts of the other knights. Some see him as a useful tool to be wielded. When Anakin finally speaks, his words chill everyone present. In accent-tinged but increasingly fluent common tongue, he says, "I was a slave once. I know the sound of chains, even when they're made of gold and covered in pretty words. I won't be anyone's weapon." The tension in the sept becomes palpable. Sir Keevan's face hardens as he realizes that persuasion has failed. The knights' hands move closer to their sword hilts. The villagers huddle together, sensing that violence is about to erupt in their sacred space. And Anakin's hand rests on his lightsaber, though he hasn't yet drawn it. What follows is a masterclass in how quickly situations can escalate beyond any hope of peaceful resolution. Sir Keevan, still hoping to avoid bloodshed, orders his men to take the boy alive. "He's just a child," he declares. "How much trouble can one boy be?" The answer comes in the form of blue light cutting through the sept's dim interior as Anakin's lightsaber ignites. The knights, despite years of training and experience in warfare, freeze for a crucial moment, their minds struggling to process what they're seeing. That moment of hesitation is all Anakin needs. The Force flows through him with an intensity he's never experienced before, amplified by the raw emotions and violent energies that permeate this world. He can see the knights' intended moves before they make them, feel their tactical decisions forming in their minds before they're fully conscious of them. When they finally overcome their shock and charge, it's like watching men move through thick honey while Anakin dances between raindrops. His lightsaber carves through their steel weapons and armor as if they were made of butter. The first knight to reach him swings his sword in a powerful overhead strike, only to watch in horror as his blade is severed in two. Anakin's return stroke opens the man's chest from shoulder to hip, the lightsaber's intense heat cauterizing the wound instantly. The smell of burned flesh fills the sept, adding to the surreal horror of the scene. But Anakin isn't content with simple defense. The dark influences he's been absorbing from this world of constant warfare and political treachery fuel his anger. These men came to take his freedom, to make him a tool for their master's ambitions. They represent everything he learned to hate during his years in slavery. His counterattack is devastating and brutal. Using the Force, he hurls knights into walls with bone-crushing force. He collapses sections of the sept's roof onto his attackers, demonstrating a level of telekinetic power that shouldn't be possible for someone his age. When one knight tries to flee, Anakin uses the Force to drag him back, choking him slowly while staring into his eyes. The man dies, seeing his own reflection in the cold, pitiless gaze of a child who has already learned to kill without remorse. The battle, if it can be called that, lasts less than 5 minutes. When the blue light finally fades and Anakin deactivates, His lightsaber 23 knights lie dead or dying in the ruins of Millbrook's sept. Sir Kevan Lannister himself survives, but only because Anakin deliberately spares him. "Tell your lord," the boy says, his voice carrying an authority that belongs on no child's lips, "that I am no one's slave. The next men he sends will not be shown mercy." The surviving knights flee back toward Casterly Rock, carrying with them tales that will fundamentally alter how the great houses of Westeros view this mysterious child. They speak of a boy who fights like he can see the future, who wields a blade of pure energy, who can kill with a gesture or a glance. More importantly, they speak of his complete lack of mercy for those who try to control him. But Anakin's victory comes at a terrible price. The villagers of Millbrook, the first people in this world to show him kindness, now look upon him with undisguised terror. Children hide behind their mothers' skirts when he approaches. Men cross themselves and mutter prayers to the Seven for protection. The Septon who tried to help him now declares the sept defiled and demands that it be torn down and rebuilt. For the first time since arriving in Westeros, Anakin truly understands his isolation. He has power beyond imagination, but no one to share it with. He has the strength to protect people, but his very presence brings danger to those he tries to help. The darkness within him, fed by this world's casual brutality and his own traumatic experiences, whispers that this is how it should be. If they fear him, they can't hurt him. If they won't accept his friendship, they can serve his will. Word of the massacre at Millbrook reaches every major power in Westeros within days. Ravens fly between castles carrying increasingly dire warnings about the boy's capabilities. The original reports of his abilities were dismissed by many as peasant superstitions and exaggerations, but Sir Kevan Lannister's testimony cannot be ignored. He's a seasoned knight and a respected member of one of the realm's most powerful houses. When he speaks of a child who single-handedly slaughtered 24 trained warriors, people listen. The political ramifications are immediate and far-reaching. Robert Baratheon, deep in his campaign against the Targaryens, suddenly finds himself facing a new variable that could tip the balance of power in unpredictable directions. If the boy sides with the royalists, his rebellion could be crushed. If he remains neutral, he represents a wild card that could disrupt carefully laid strategies. And if he can be convinced to join the rebel cause, the war could be won within months. Rhaegar Targaryen, brooding in his tower with his books and prophecies, becomes convinced that Anakin's arrival is connected to the coming darkness he's read about in ancient texts. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence. A child with godlike power appears just as the realm tears itself apart in civil war, mere years before the long summer is prophesied to end. Could this be the prince that was promised? The one who will lead the fight against the others when they return? Meanwhile, in the Iron Islands, Balon Greyjoy sees opportunity in the chaos. If all the great houses exhaust themselves trying to capture or kill this mysterious boy, the Iron Islands could launch raids against weakened coastal settlements. Some of his captains even suggest trying to recruit the child themselves, offering him a fleet and the freedom to take what he wants from the world. Across the narrow sea, word begins to filter to the free cities of Essos. In Braavos, the Faceless, men take particular interest in reports of someone who seems to possess abilities similar to their own mystical arts, but far more powerful. In Pentos, magisters wonder if this boy could be hired as the ultimate sellsword. In Volantis, the Red Priests debate whether he represents a manifestation of Rhalla's power or a servant of the Great Other. But perhaps the most significant reaction comes from an unexpected source: the Maesters of Old Town. In the Citadel's highest tower, Archmaester Marwyn pores over ancient texts and forbidden knowledge, trying to understand what manner of being could possess such abilities. His research leads him to fragmentary accounts of the Long Night, of the last hero who fought against the darkness with a sword of fire. Could it be that the old stories weren't metaphorical? Could there have been others like this boy in ages past? As news of the boy's power spreads, so do the attempts to recruit or eliminate him. The faith militant mobilizes in force, sending hundreds of armed septons and faithful warriors toward the Riverlands, with orders to bring the child for judgment. House Frey, ever opportunistic, begins moving troops to try to cut off his escape routes, hoping to capture him and sell him to the highest bidder. Even smaller houses see opportunity. House Went sends ravens to their neighbors, suggesting a joint expedition, while House Bracken and House Blackwood temporarily suspend their ancient feud to discuss cooperating against what they see as a mutual threat. Anakin, meanwhile, has left the ruins of Millbrook behind. The villagers made it clear that he was no longer welcome, and staying would only bring more violence to people who had already suffered enough. He travels alone through the war-torn countryside, using the Force to avoid the armies and brigands that crisscross the land. His destination is unclear even to himself. He knows only that he needs to find some place where he can be left alone to mourn Qui-Gon and figure out how to survive in this violent world. But solitude proves elusive. His first major encounter comes when he stumbles upon a group of refugees fleeing the fighting between rebel and royalist forces. They're mostly small folk, farmers whose crops have been burned, craftsmen whose shops have been looted, families whose sons have been pressed into service by passing armies. Among them are several young children, including a girl about his own age, who reminds him painfully of some of the slave children he knew on Tatooine. The refugees are being harassed by deserters, soldiers from various armies who have abandoned their posts and turned to banditry. These aren't the crude brigands who attacked Millbrook. These are trained warriors with good equipment and military discipline. They've been systematically robbing the refugee column, taking not just valuables but food and supplies desperately needed for survival. Some of the younger women have simply vanished during the night, their fate unspoken but understood by all. Anakin watches this injustice unfold from hiding, his anger building with each new cruelty he witnesses. These people remind him of the slaves on Tatooine, powerless, oppressed, suffering while those with strength take what they want without consequence. The Force churns within him, fed by his rage and the ambient violence of the war-torn. The battle that follows is less a fight than an execution. Anakin has learned from his encounter with the Lannister Knights. He studied how they moved, how they thought, how they tried to coordinate against him. These deserters, for all their military training, have never faced anything like a Force-sensitive opponent with a lightsaber. He cuts through them like wheat before the scythe, his blade leaving trails of blue fire in the dim light of dawn. But it's not just the lightsaber that makes him deadly. The Force flows through him with dark intensity, allowing him to anticipate every attack, every desperate gambit, every attempt to flee. He uses telekinetic powers to hurl men into trees with enough force to shatter bones. He chokes others with invisible hands, watching the life fade from their eyes as they claw at their throats. When one deserter tries to use a refugee as a human shield, Anakin simply lifts the man into the air and slowly crushes his windpipe, while the terrified captive watches. The refugees witness this display of power with a mixture of gratitude and horror. They're saved, but at the cost of watching a child commit acts of violence that would make seasoned warriors sick. Some of them fall to their knees, declaring him a god sent by the Seven to protect the innocent. Others make signs against evil and whisper prayers for protection from the very boy who just saved them. This moment marks a crucial turning point in Anakin's psychological development. On Tatooine, violence was something that happened to him and those he cared about. In his brief time with Qui-Gon, he learned that violence should be a last resort, used only to protect others. But here in Westeros, he's discovering that violence is a tool that can solve problems, that can give him control over situations where he might otherwise be helpless. The refugees beg him to stay with them, to continue protecting them on their journey to safety. Some offer him everything they have left in the world, a handful of copper coins, a family heirloom, the last of their food. Their desperation moves him, but he also recognizes the dangerous precedent it sets. If he becomes known as a protector of refugees, every displaced person in the Seven Kingdoms will seek him out. He'll become a magnet for both those who need help and those who see opportunity in exploiting the desperate. More troubling is his own reaction to their worship. Part of him, the part that was shaped by years of powerlessness as a slave, enjoys being feared and revered. For the first time in his life, people look at him and see someone who matters, someone whose will cannot be ignored or dismissed. The dark whispers in his mind, fed by this world's casual brutality, suggest that this is how things should be. The strong rule, the weak serve, and he is stronger than anyone. He leaves the refugees with supplies taken from the deserters and directions to the nearest settlement still under stable control, but he doesn't promise to protect them further. As he watches them disappear into the distance, part of him already misses the feeling of being needed, of being important to someone. It's a dangerous realization that will shape his future choices in ways he doesn't yet understand. Word of this second massacre spreads even faster than news of the first. The refugees reach safety and tell their story to anyone who will listen. A boy god who wields starfire, who can kill with a glance, who appeared from nowhere to save them from certain doom. The tale grows with each telling, as such stories always do, until it bears little resemblance to what actually happened. These embellished accounts reach the ears of a figure who will play a crucial role in Anakin's future, Melisandre of Ashai. Though she won't arrive in Westeros for years in the original timeline, the strange energies surrounding Anakin's presence have drawn her attention across the narrow sea. Her fires show her visions of a child wreathed in light and shadow, wielding power that seems to burn with the essence of Aralor himself. Could this be the promised prince reborn, or perhaps something even more significant, a direct manifestation of her God's will made flesh? She begins making preparations to travel to Westeros, convinced that she must witness this child's power firsthand. Her journey will take months, but she's patient. If her visions are true, this boy represents either the realm's salvation or its doom, and either way, she must be there to guide events toward the proper conclusion. Meanwhile, the political situation in Westeros continues to deteriorate as various factions mobilize in response to the boy's growing reputation. King Aerys, deep in his madness, becomes obsessed with the idea of recruiting Anakin to his cause. He sees parallels between the boy's fire sword and the legendary weapons of Valyria, convincing himself that this child must be connected to House Targaryen's dragon blood. He sends ravens throughout the realm, offering vast rewards for anyone who brings the boy to King's Landing alive. This royal proclamation has the unintended effect of making Anakin a target for every sellsword, bounty, hunter and desperate fortune seeker in the Seven Kingdoms. Gold-hungry men converge on the riverlands from every direction, turning the search for him into a chaotic free-for-all that further destabilizes an already war-torn region. Robert Baratheon, hearing of the king's obsession with the mysterious child, sees an opportunity to strike a psychological blow against his enemies. If he can reach the boy first and convince him to join the rebel cause, it would be a tremendous propaganda victory. More practically, having such a powerful ally could end the war quickly and with minimal additional bloodshed. He dispatches his most trusted allies, including a young Stannis Baratheon, to make contact with Anakin and assess his capabilities firsthand. The converging forces create a perfect storm of chaos in the Riverlands. Armies march and countermarch across the devastated landscape, each group convinced that they're close to finding their quarry. Skirmishes break out between different factions, turning the search for Anakin into a series of brutal conflicts that have little to do with the original rebellion. In the midst of this chaos, Anakin has found temporary refuge in an abandoned holdfast deep in the trackless forests east of Harrenhal. The small castle was clearly evacuated in haste. Valuable items remain scattered throughout the rooms, and the kitchen still contains stores of preserved food. Most importantly, its isolation provides him with the peace he desperately needs to process what he's experienced and decide what he wants to do with his life. For several days, he lives like a hermit, exploring the empty halls and trying to make sense of his situation. The Force whispers to him of approaching danger, of the armies converging on his general location, but for now, he's safe. He uses this respite to experiment with his abilities, discovering that the Force flows differently in this world than it did in his home galaxy. The constant warfare and political intrigue seem to feed the darker aspects of his power, making it easier to access emotions like anger and fear, but harder to find the peace and serenity that Qui-Gon taught him to seek. During his time alone, he also begins having vivid dreams that feel more like visions. He sees flashes of possible futures, himself sitting on a throne made of swords, ruling through fear and power, armies kneeling before him as he brings order to a chaotic world, great cities burning as he imposes his will on those who resist him. Other visions show different paths, him working alongside noble heroes to protect the innocent, using his abilities to heal rather than harm, finding some way to return to his home galaxy and complete his Jedi training. The visions disturb him, because he can't tell which ones represent destiny and which ones are merely possibilities. On Tatooine, his dreams sometimes showed him glimpses of the future, but they were usually simple things: winning a pod race, avoiding a sandstorm, sensing when Watto was in a particularly bad mood. These visions feel different, more complex and layered, as if the Force itself is trying to show him the weight of the choices he'll have to make. His isolation ends abruptly when a group of faith-militant warriors discovers the holdfast. They're led by a fanatical Septon named Brother Lancel, a man who genuinely believes that he's been chosen by the Seven to either redeem or destroy the boy who has disrupted the natural order. Unlike the soldiers who came before, these men aren't motivated by gold or political advantage. They see themselves as warriors in a holy cause, fighting to protect the realm from supernatural corruption. The confrontation begins not with violence, but with theological debate. Brother Lancel is an educated man, well-versed in the scriptures and capable of articulate argument. He approaches Anakin not as an enemy, but as a potential convert, someone who might be saved if properly instructed in the ways of righteousness. For hours, they sit in the Holdfast's Great Hall, discussing the nature of power, responsibility, and divine will. Anakin finds himself genuinely engaged by the conversation. Brother Lancel's arguments about using power in service of others echo things Qui-Gon taught him about the Jedi way. For a moment, he allows himself to hope that he might have found someone who sees him as more than just a weapon to be used or a threat to be eliminated. But that hope is shattered when the Septon reveals his true purpose. He wants Anakin to submit to the faith's judgment, to allow them to determine whether his abilities are divine or demonic in nature. The boy's reaction is swift and decisive. He's tired of people trying to control him, tired of being seen as something to be claimed or destroyed rather than as a person. Anakin doesn't just defeat them, he makes examples of them. Using the Force, he tears the weapons from their hands and pins them against the walls while he explains, in chilling detail, exactly what he's capable of doing to them. He demonstrates his power by slowly crushing pieces of their armor without touching them, by lifting them into the air and holding them suspended while he speaks, by showing them glimpses of the dark visions that have been haunting his dreams. "You want to know if my power comes from your gods?" he asks, his child's voice carrying tones that belong on no mortal throat. "Your gods are weak. I've seen what real power looks like, and this isn't divine intervention. This is just the beginning of what I can do when people try to cage me." He kills only Brother Lancel, using the Force to stop the man's heart while staring directly into his eyes. The other warriors he leaves alive, but broken in spirit. They flee the holdfast, carrying word that the boy is indeed demonic in nature, that his power comes from sources beyond mortal understanding, and that any attempt to redeem him is not just futile but dangerous to the souls of those who try. This encounter marks another crucial shift in Anakin's psychological development. He's discovered that he enjoys the fear and submission of his enemies, that there's a dark satisfaction in proving his superiority over those who would judge him. The part of him that was shaped by slavery whispers that this is justice. For years, others held power over him, and now he's simply taking his turn at the top of the hierarchy. But even as he revels in his victory, part of him mourns what he's becoming. He remembers Qui-Gon's teachings about compassion and selflessness, remembers the man who saw potential for good in a slave boy on a distant planet. That version of himself seems increasingly distant, like a half-remembered dream from someone else's life. Word of his latest display of power spreads like wildfire across Westeros, carried by the terrified survivors of the Faith militant expedition. The High Septon himself declares the boy to be an abomination that must be cleansed from the world, issuing a holy decree that any man who kills him will be granted immediate absolution for all past sins and guaranteed entry into the seven heavens. This religious sanction transforms what was already a dangerous situation into an outright crusade, with thousands of faithful warriors converging on the Riverlands with the explicit goal of martyring themselves in battle against a child. The political ramifications of the High Septon's decree reverberate throughout the Seven Kingdoms. Lords who were previously neutral in the rebellion find themselves forced to choose sides as the religious conflict threatens to overshadow the original war between Robert and Aerys. Some houses declare for the faith, seeing an opportunity to gain religious legitimacy for their rule. Others reject the decree as overreach by religious authorities who have no business interfering in secular matters. Perhaps most significantly, the decree drives a wedge between various factions within each army. Robert's forces include many devoutly religious men who feel torn between their loyalty to their lord and their duty to the Seven. Aerys's supporters face similar divisions, as the Mad King's growing obsession with the boy puts him at odds with the religious authorities he's supposed to protect and serve. Into this chaos rides a new player, Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning himself. Rhaegar has sent his most trusted knight not to capture Anakin, but to evaluate him. If the boy truly possesses the power that reports suggest, he might be the key to understanding the prophecies that have consumed the prince's attention. But Arthur brings his own agenda to the mission. As one of the finest knights in the realm, he's curious to test his legendary skills against an opponent who fights in ways no Westerosi has ever encountered. The meeting between Arthur Dayne and Anakin Skywalker takes place in the ruins of an ancient sept deep in the forests of the Riverlands. Arthur comes alone, having left his men several miles away, and approaches with dawn sheathed at his side. He's heard the reports of the boy's abilities, but seeing Anakin in person for the first time is still a shock. He's so young, so seemingly innocent, that it's difficult to reconcile his appearance with the stories of his terrible power. Their initial conversation is cautious, but respectful. Arthur explains that he comes not as an enemy, but as an emissary from Prince Rhaegar, who believes that Anakin might be connected to ancient prophecies about a coming darkness. He speaks of the long night, of the others who once threatened to destroy all life in Westeros, and of the prophecy of the prince that was promised who would lead the fight against their return. Anakin listens with growing interest. The idea that his arrival might be connected to some greater destiny appeals to the part of him that still remembers wanting to be a hero. But he's also suspicious of anyone who wants to use him as a tool, even in service of apparently noble goals. He's learned that people who speak of destiny and prophecy usually mean that they want him to do what they think is best, regardless of what he wants for himself. The conversation might have continued peacefully, but it's interrupted by the arrival of a company of knights loyal to House Craighall. They've been tracking Arthur's movements, hoping to use him as a guide to the boy's location, and they arrive just as the two are beginning to establish a rapport. Their leader, Sir Burton Craighall, has brought 20 men with orders to capture the boy and claim the substantial bounty that King Aerys has placed on his head. Arthur immediately moves to protect Anakin, recognizing that the boy might be crucial to understanding Rhaegar's prophecies. He draws Dawn, its milky white blade gleaming in the forest twilight, and places himself between Anakin and the Craighall Knights. For a moment, it seems like the situation might be resolved through negotiation, as even Burton Craighall hesitates to cross swords with the legendary Arthur Dayne. But the moment of restraint passes quickly. The bounty on Anakin's head is too tempting, and the Craighall Knights charge, hoping to overwhelm even the Sword of the Morning through sheer numbers. What follows is a battle that will be remembered in song and story for generations, though. Few will believe the truth of what actually happened. Arthur Dayne fights like the hero of legend he is, Dawn moving with impossible speed and precision as he cuts down attacker after attacker. His skill is so great that for several minutes, it seems like he might actually prevail against overwhelming odds. But even legends have limits, and 20-to-1 odds eventually begin to tell. Just as Arthur begins to tire, just as the Craighall Knights start to press their advantage, Anakin enters the battle. His lightsaber ignites with a sound like thunder, and suddenly there are two blades of impossible sharpness carving through the attacking knights. But where Arthur fights with practiced technique and knightly honor, Anakin fights with the raw fury of someone who has been pushed too far too many times. The combination is devastating. Arthur's legendary skill provides a framework of tactical excellence, while Anakin's force powers and lightsaber turn every exchange into a potential death sentence for their enemies. They move together like they've been fighting side by side for years, Arthur's conventional swordsmanship complementing Anakin's supernatural abilities in ways that neither could have anticipated. The battle ends with all 20 Craighall Knights dead or dying in the forest clearing. Arthur and Anakin stand back to back, breathing heavily, their respective blades still humming with lethal energy. For the first time since arriving in Westeros, Anakin feels like he's found someone who might understand him, someone who fights not for gold or glory, but out of genuine conviction. Their conversation after the battle reveals depths to both characters that neither expected. Arthur speaks of his service to Prince Rhaegar, of his belief that the prince represents hope for a better future for the realm. He talks about the weight of legend, about how being called the greatest knight in Westeros creates expectations that no mortal man can consistently meet. Most importantly, he speaks of the loneliness that comes with being set apart from others by exceptional ability. Anakin, in turn, shares more of his story than he's told anyone since arriving in Westeros. He speaks of slavery, of watching his mother suffer while being powerless to help her, of the brief hope he felt when Qui-Gon promised to free him and train him as a Jedi. He talks about the crash that brought him to this world, about the growing darkness he feels within himself, and about his fear that he's becoming the very kind of person he once dreamed of fighting against. Arthur recognizes something in the boy's words that reminds him of conversations with Rhaegar about the burden of prophecy and expectation. He makes a decision that will alter the course of history. Instead of trying to bring Anakin to his prince, he offers to help the boy find his own path. If Anakin truly is connected to the prophecies, Arthur reasons, then forcing him into a role he doesn't want will only ensure that those prophecies are fulfilled in the worst possible way. Together, they leave the site of the battle and begin, traveling toward the western coast of Westeros. Arthur's plan is to help Anakin reach the Iron Islands, where he might be able to book passage on a ship sailing to Essos. Far from the political machinations of Westeros, the boy might have a chance to grow up without constantly being used as a weapon in other people's wars. This realization hits Anakin like a physical blow. He came to this world an innocent child, wanting nothing more than to survive and perhaps find a way home. But his very existence has become a catalyst for destruction on a scale that dwarfs anything he could have accomplished through direct action. The knowledge that his presence is causing such suffering weighs on him heavily, adding another layer of guilt and self-doubt to his already complex psychological state. Arthur tries to reassure him that the chaos would have happened anyway, that the realm was already tearing itself apart in civil war before he arrived. But Anakin can feel through the Force that this isn't entirely true. His presence has accelerated and intensified conflicts that might otherwise have remained manageable. He's become a living symbol of power that everyone wants to possess or destroy, and that symbolism has taken on a life of its own. Their philosophical discussions are interrupted when they encounter the aftermath of a particularly brutal massacre. An entire village has been destroyed, not by armies or bandits, but by religious fanatics who believed the settlement might be harboring the demon child. Men, women, and children lie scattered throughout the burned ruins, killed not for any crime they committed, but simply because they lived in the wrong place when religious hysteria reached its peak. The scene triggers something primal in Anakin's psyche. These people died because of him, because his very existence has driven others to madness and extremism. The guilt is overwhelming, but it's quickly transmuted into rage. If the world wants to see him as a monster, if his mere presence is enough to justify slaughtering innocents, then perhaps it's time to give them the monster they fear. Arthur recognizes the dangerous shift in the boy's emotional state and tries to intervene, but it's too late. The darkness that has been growing within Anakin since his arrival in Westeros finally breaks free of his conscious control. The Force erupts from him in a wave of pure destruction, leveling what remained of the village buildings and sending shockwaves through the earth for miles around. When the fury passes, Anakin stands in the center of a crater of his own making, his lightsaber blazing with an intensity that makes it difficult to look at directly. Arthur approaches cautiously, recognizing that he's witnessing a transformation that will have consequences far beyond this moment. The boy he was trying to help save from darkness has embraced that darkness fully, and the power he now radiates is unlike anything the Knight has ever encountered. "They want a monster," Anakin says, his voice carrying harmonics that seem to resonate in the bones of anyone who hears it. "They've made their choice. Now I'll make mine." The declaration marks the end of any hope that Anakin might find a peaceful place in this world. He's tried hiding. He's tried reasoning. He's tried finding allies who might understand him. All of it has failed. The political and religious forces of Westeros have made it clear that they will never allow him to exist as anything other than a weapon in their conflicts or a threat to be eliminated. If that's the role they've chosen for him, he'll play it to the fullest. But he'll play it on his own terms, not theirs. The armies that hunt him want to capture a valuable prize or eliminate a dangerous enemy. What they're about to face is something far worse. A young god driven to fury by a world that has given him no choice but to become the very thing it fears most. Arthur Dayne faces an impossible choice as he watches the boy he hoped to save transform into something that might well be the doom of Westeros itself. His oath to Prince Rhaegar demands that he try to guide events toward the fulfillment of the prophecies that promise salvation from the coming darkness. But the child standing before him radiates a power that feels more aligned with that darkness than with any hope of light. In the end, Arthur chooses loyalty over prophecy. He cannot bring himself to strike down a child regardless of what that child might become. Instead, he sheathes Dawn and steps back, making a choice that will haunt him for whatever time remains to him. He will not help Anakin embrace the darkness, but neither will he stand in the way of what seems increasingly like an inevitable transformation. Anakin interprets Arthur's withdrawal as abandonment, the final confirmation that even the most honorable people in this world will ultimately choose their own interests over his well-being. The last restraints on his power and his anger fall away, leaving him free to pursue a path that will reshape Westeros in ways no prophecy ever predicted. The war between Robert Baratheon and Aerys Targaryen becomes a secondary concern as news spreads of what happened at the destroyed village. Witnesses speak of the earth itself shaking, of a light brighter than the sun erupting from the ruins, of a child's voice speaking words that carried the authority of gods. More disturbing are reports that the boy has begun gathering followers, that desperate people are flocking to his banner in the belief that he offers them protection in an increasingly chaotic world. These followers aren't soldiers in any traditional sense. They're refugees and outcasts, broken men and dispossessed small folk, people who have lost everything in the endless wars and see Anakin as their last hope for survival. Many of them worship him openly, creating shrines from pieces of his destroyed enemies' equipment and offering prayers to the boy they call the Lightbringer or the Sword of Stars. This religious dimension to his growing movement terrifies the established powers more than any military threat could. If the common people begin to see Anakin as divine, if they start believing that the Seven have sent him to overthrow the existing order, the very foundations of Westerosi society could crumble. Kings rule by the grace of the gods and the consent of the governed. If the gods have chosen a new champion and the governed have transferred their allegiance to him, then every throne in the Seven Kingdoms becomes vulnerable. The implications extend far beyond simple military conquest. Anakin's movement represents something unprecedented in Westerosi history, a true revolution of ideology rather than mere succession politics. His followers don't simply want to replace one king with another. They want to tear down the entire feudal system that has oppressed them for centuries. They speak of a world where strength and merit matter more than birth and bloodline, where the strong protect the weak out of genuine care rather than feudal obligation. This philosophical transformation manifests in practical ways that horrify the traditional nobility. Villages that declare for Anakin stop sending taxes to their lords, instead pooling resources to support refugee camps and defensive militias. Small folk begin organizing themselves into communes that share labor and resources equally, rejecting the hierarchical structures that have defined their lives for generations. Most disturbing of all, they begin teaching their children to read and write, skills traditionally reserved for the noble classes. Recognizing the existential threat this represents, both Robert and Aerys make unprecedented decisions. Robert sends envoys to King's Landing under flags of truce, proposing a temporary cessation of hostilities so that their combined forces can deal with what both sides now recognize as a threat to the established order itself. Aerys, in a rare moment of clarity piercing through his madness, agrees to the proposal, though he secretly hopes to find some way to turn the boy's power to his own advantage once the immediate crisis has passed. The alliance between rebels and royalists creates strange bedfellows throughout Westeros. Stark men find themselves marching alongside Lannister troops, while knights who were trying to kill each other just weeks ago now plan joint strategies against their common enemy. The temporary peace reveals just how much damage the various hunts for Anakin have already done to both sides. Entire companies have been lost in fruitless searches, and the constant movement of forces has left key strongholds vulnerable to attack. But the cessation of hostilities between the traditional factions has an unintended consequence. It frees up thousands of soldiers who were previously committed to fighting each other. Many of these men, particularly those from the lower ranks, find themselves questioning what they're fighting for. If lords who were ready to kill each other yesterday can unite today, what does that say about the causes they claimed to serve? Some desert their posts entirely, heading home to protect their families from the chaos consuming the realm. Others, hearing rumors of a boy god who promises to protect the weak and overthrow the corrupt, begin making their way toward Anakin's growing movement. The defections accelerate when word spreads of how Anakin treats his followers. Unlike traditional armies where common soldiers are expendable resources, Anakin's forces operate more like an extended family. Wounded fighters receive the best medical care available, often from Anakin himself, who has begun using the Force to accelerate healing and mend injuries that would normally be fatal. Families of those killed in battle are cared for by the community, their children educated and their needs met without question. This compassionate treatment of his followers stems partly from Anakin's own experiences as a slave, but it's also a calculated decision. He understands that loyalty built on genuine care is more durable than loyalty built on fear or obligation. His followers don't serve him because they have to. They serve him because they want to, because they believe he offers them something worth fighting for. But even as he shows remarkable compassion for his allies, his treatment of enemies becomes increasingly brutal and creative. The dark side of the Force whispers to him of new ways to use his power, and he finds himself experimenting with techniques that would horrify any Jedi. He learns to induce madness with a touch, to implant false memories that tear apart enemy command structures from within, to use the Force to manipulate the very air in a person's lungs until they suffocate while appearing perfectly healthy. These new abilities make him even more terrifying to his enemies, but they also accelerate his own moral decay. Each time he uses the Force to cause suffering rather than prevent it, the easier it becomes to justify even greater cruelties. The boundary between justice and revenge blurs until it disappears entirely, leaving him with a worldview where anyone who opposes him deserves whatever fate he chooses to inflict. As his power and influence grow, Anakin begins receiving overtures from unexpected sources. Merchant guilds in the free cities send representatives offering to fund his movement in exchange for favorable trade agreements. Dothraki Khalasars, intrigued by reports of a boy who can single-handedly destroy armies, send gifts and propose alliances. Even slavers from Slavers Bay reach out, apparently missing the irony of trying to ally with someone whose hatred of slavery is one of his defining characteristics. The most significant contact comes from across the narrow sea, where reports of Anakin's activities have reached the ears of a young Daenerys Targaryen. Still just a child herself, she's intrigued by stories of another young person wielding seemingly impossible power. Her brother Viserys sees opportunity in the chaos-consuming Westeros, wondering if this mysterious boy might be a useful ally in reclaiming their family's throne. But it's not the Targaryens who make first contact with Anakin. That honor belongs to Melisandre of Ashai, who arrives in Westeros aboard a ship whose crew whispers of strange lights and impossible winds that carried them across the narrow sea in half the expected time. She comes bearing ancient artifacts and forbidden knowledge, prepared for either salvation or destruction, depending on what she finds when she finally meets the boy whose power has been calling to her across continents. Their first encounter takes place in the ruins of a sept that Anakin's followers have converted into a makeshift throne room. The original religious imagery has been covered with banners bearing the symbol of his lightsaber, and the altar has been replaced with a simple wooden chair where he holds court. When Melisandre enters, the temperature in the room seems to drop. several degrees, and the flames of the torches flicker despite the absence of any wind. She approaches him without fear, her red robes rustling in the unnatural stillness. "I have seen you in the flames," she says, her voice carrying an authority that makes even Anakin's most fanatical followers step back. "You burn bright enough to light the world, but also dark enough to consume it. The question is, which flame you will choose to feed?" Their conversation reveals depths to the cosmic forces at play that neither fully understands. Melisandre speaks of R'hllor and the Great Other, of an eternal struggle between light and darkness that transcends individual worlds or galaxies. Anakin listens with growing fascination as she describes visions of ice zombies advancing from the far north, of dragons being reborn in the east, of a long night that will test every living thing's will to survive. "Your arrival has accelerated events that were meant to unfold over decades," she explains, her ruby glowing softly in the dim light. The others stir in their frozen lands, sensing the disturbance your power has created in the balance of the world. They march earlier than prophecy foretold, and the realm is not ready to face them. This revelation forces Anakin to confront the possibility that his rebellion against Westeros's political system might have doomed the very people he claims to want to protect. If his presence is indeed triggering an early return of an existential threat to all life, then perhaps the traditional rulers he despises are right to oppose him. The thought fills him with rage, but also with something he's felt little of since Qui-Gon's death: doubt. Melisandre recognizes his internal struggle and presses her advantage. She shows him visions in the flames, glimpses of possible futures that branch and shift like living things. In some, he stands atop a mountain of corpses, the last living thing in a world of ice and darkness. In others, he works alongside unlikely allies to forge weapons that can cut through the heart of winter itself. The visions are fragmentary and contradictory, but they all share one common element. His choices in the coming months will determine which future becomes reality. "Power without purpose is destruction," she tells him, echoing words that Qui-Gon might have said in different circumstances. "You have the strength to reshape this world, but strength alone will not save it. You need wisdom, and wisdom comes from understanding that some battles are worth fighting even when they offer no personal gain." Her words resonate with something deep in Anakin's psyche, a memory of the boy who once dreamed of freeing all the slaves in the galaxy. But that idealism feels impossibly distant now, buried under layers of anger and pain and the corrupting influence of the dark side. He's not sure he can find his way back to that person, or if that person ever truly existed outside of his imagination. Their philosophical discussion is interrupted by urgent reports from his scouts. The combined royalist rebel armies are moving, again, but not toward his position. Instead, they're marching north, toward the wall, where disturbing reports have been filtering south for weeks. Dead men walking, unnatural cold spreading even in summer, and most ominously, the complete cessation of communication from several Night's Watch castles. The implications hit both Anakin and Melisandre simultaneously. The others aren't just stirring, they're already moving. The early onset of the long night that his presence triggered isn't a future possibility, but a current reality. Whatever political games the great houses of Westeros want to play will have to wait. The realm faces an enemy that threatens every living thing regardless of birth or allegiance.